Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:07 p.m. in Hungary. It's I've even forgotten what long sunny afternoons are. The sun just disappears early. The halcyon days of summer long gone, forgotten, and we're just mentally prepared now for a very long, miserable fall and winter. So, on that cheery note, let me welcome everybody who has joined me. Thank you so much. Really happy to have you with me. And of course, we are now 1 week away from the debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And Harris is continuing with her tried and true strategy um, of basically just doing absolutely nothing. I mean, just basically you come along, you make a banal speech about we have to grow the middle class. I always love it. The Democrats always talk about we must grow the middle class. We've grown the middle class, and then just simply let the media do the rest of the talking. So we've got that coming up in a week's time, and as I think I've argued that whatever one may say about Harris and Harris's obvious inadequacies, it's quite likely that she'll prove to be a quite effective debater. I mean, to be good at these kinds of debates, you don't actually have to be a good debater as such. You don't have to, be good at the cut and thrust of argument and parrying points and, coming up with counterpoints. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is keep repeating your 3 or 4 talking points, and then you get your zingers in. Be prepared to get your zingers in. Even as we speak, she's rehearsing the various zingers, and then once you've done that, again, just leave everything to the media. The media will then spin it to say this was an absolutely fantastic performance by Harris, probably the most formidable presidential debating performance since Jack Kennedy, and maybe even surpassing Jack Kennedy. So I think that she can count on that response. And of course, we are just simply now 9 weeks away from an election. So therefore, it is quite an extraordinary thing that you can pretty much just run out the clock and just let the media do the rest of the work. Anyway, let's just take a look at some of the points that people have made. Anna Marie, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you for joining us. Always want to know about Switzerland. So you're our our go-to person there. So please always keep us informed as to what's happening there. And then Stone River says, are there comparable precedents for the Maduro plane snatch? So again, thank you so much, Stone River. Those very appreciate your generosity. I don't know whether there. I mean, I can't think of any offhand. There may be. I mean, it's a very odd situation. I mean, obviously they the Americans are very unfavorably disposed towards Maduro, and so therefore with these notions of sanctions, Didn't even have anything to do with the recent elections. I mean, this is just simply this is going back to um, the sanctions regime that has been imposed on Maduro. I mean, keep in mind that far worse things have been done to Venezuela. I mean, rather than just the seizure of a plane. I mean, that's bad enough, obviously humiliating enough, but nonetheless, not quite as dire as seizing Venezuela's gold bullion. That was worth something like $1 billion. That was in the vaults of the Bank of England, and the Bank of England has still not returned um, this gold bullion to Venezuela. Um, so I mean, it, it's obviously of a piece with the sanctions regime of just sort of seizing a country's assets. They have an assets here. I mean, in this case, it was the plane was in the Dominican Republic, and so they went in there and just simply seized it and said, "Oh well, that was it's in violation of sanctions." Obviously, it's a completely illegal act because any kind of unilateral imposition of sanctions is, by definition, illegal. In that these are not sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council. I mean, even that's bad enough, incidentally. I've not been a supporter of sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council, unlike Russia, because Russia has taken part in sanctions regimes that were blessed by the UN Security Council. So the sanctions regime against Iraq during the 1990s, I mean, Russia was very much a part of that. The sanctions against North Korea, the sanctions against Iran, they were all imposed by the UN Security Council. And again, Russia was a participant in that because otherwise Russia could have just simply vetoed it, and then it would have been there would just have been unilateral sanctions. But I'm against any kind of sanctions because they cause a great deal of hardship. Um, because ultimately sanctions um, are really only effective against economically weak states, and that's why they are imposed um, against them. I mean, the sanctions that the West has attempted to impose on Russia since 2022 have failed. They've not achieved their goals. They've not caused any great hardship because Russia is just too big, too powerful an economy to be hurt by sanctions. But of course, other countries are not as resilient, and so sanctions against them can be quite devastating. I mean, obviously, it caused a great deal of hardship in Iraq, but somehow the Russians, they like to play this game. Well, those are legal. I mean, if they're imposed by the UN Security Council, they are legal, and in a way, it's legal only in the sense that the UN Charter envisages the imposition of sanctions under. This is under what's is it? Not Article 7. But, is it under Chapter 7 of the Charter? So you can either have the UN imposing sanctions or the UN imposing the use of force, mandating the use of force. But anyway, I mean, just to go back to Venezuela, the sanctions that the United States and the European Union imposed on Venezuela were obviously illegal. There was no basis for them whatsoever. But the fact that they are not legal doesn't help Venezuela very much because they're there, and there's not a lot that you can do about them, and so they cause hardship. Now, in this case, this was really outright theft. They just moved in and stole this aircraft, and the United States then declared that well, we can do it because the building of this plane, the use of these spare parts of this plane was violated um, U.S. sanctions. But who the hell cares about U.S. sanctions? So it's like the United States just illegally imposes sanctions, and then if when a country tries to uh, break out of the sanctions, then the United States then declares that it has a right to punish the state. Well, this obviously in this case Venezuela, but of course anybody else who helped Venezuela to defy U.S. sanctions is then liable for punishment. So um, it's a, I mean, it's a really appalling, and and here you've got the situation that that's how again the United States kind of, and again the media play along with this, that somehow there's a legality in this. Oh well, it's legal because the U.S. imposed sanctions. But how does that in any way make anything legal? I mean, who cares that the U.S. imposed sanctions? U.S. imposed sanctions that have no validity under international law, and then if Venezuela imposed sanctions on the U.S., it has no validity under international law. So it's a but whether something comparable has happened, I'm sure it has. I can't think of anything comparable, but as I say, the seizure of the gold bullion in the Bank of England, I think is even worse than the seizure of this plane. Um, um, so Mary Grossman says also TV film only show introduction, but no attached film. Not sure I understand that. So Mary, perhaps you can explain what you mean by that. And then Jonathan, welcome, Jonathan, says Bjorn Höcke, the leader of the AFD's far people, didn't realize Otto von Bismarck was far right. No, I mean, yeah, so Bjorn Höcke is the leader in the AFD who did rather well on Sunday in the election in Thuringia, and you're absolutely right, Jonathan. It's very interesting that when these German figures talk about the Wilhelmine Empire, which obviously was the zenith of German accomplishment, German power, and German accomplishment. So for that brief moment, Germany was the biggest economy in the world, but also it was also their scientific accomplishments were second to none. They were leaders in scientific research, leaders in industrial innovation, leaders in all kinds of academic studies, such as historians. The German historians were the leading practitioners of the art of historiography in the world, and of course, German music always very strong. So that was always that was the great moment for Germany, and I think obviously Germans look back upon it with some fondness, because obviously the Hitler period was a catastrophe for the German people, but the Germany that emerged after 1945 is a completely kind of deracinated, de-Germanized, rather unpleasant, abject Germany that is basically subordinate to the United States. So it's something, Germans don't feel very happy about living in a state that is so weak and so lacking in any in any self-assurance, and they're just happy to follow the demands of the United States, and that's obviously culminating in the humiliation of the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. So it's understandable that Germans should look upon Wilhelm in Germany. Think, well, when was there this moment that you can look back with nostalgia? And the Wilhelm in Germany, obviously the Bismarck period, but even after the Bismarck period, it was a great moment. I mean, Bismarck was gone by 1890, so Wilhelm in Germany went on for another 25 years. Um, and obviously Germans look back on it. It's same with, like, if Hungary. I mean, if Hungary were to look back and say, well, when was the great moment for us? That was then obviously they can go back many centuries. Back the pre Ottoman defeat in 1526. So before that, they can look back. But in more recent times, obviously they'd look back to the Austria-Hungary era, the dual monarchy, when Hungary was obviously part of a powerful, influential empire. But anyway, these Germans, they like either Höcke and the rest of them, they obviously look back upon that great moment. The difficulty for the AFD is that as long as they're stuck in this this range of getting votes, 33, 34, 35, 36% of the vote, then they're never going to get to power, because the rest of the political establishment will always get together, combine forces to keep them out. And that was really the problem with the Sunday night's election results. You can say, yeah, this is it. This is a great victory. This is the first time this what they call far right, or whatever, let's call it a right-wing party, has come out first in any state election. Let's leave aside the federal election, but let's state election. But they're not able to form a government. And they're not able to form a government because the establishment parties will get together and will keep them out. And they can always go on doing that unless the AFD can start getting votes in the sort of late 40s. We're not even going to say up to 50%, but 46, 47%, because then that would be very difficult to keep them out. But the problem is that Thuringia and Saxony are really their base. I mean, that's where their strength lies. So, whatever they get in any election result, this is their best, because this is really their base. So, we could say, all right, they go on 33% in Thuringia, but that's your best state. You're not going to get any more than 33% anywhere, unless something changes. Now, things could change, and there's no question that if there's economic crisis, if there's war, all sorts of things could upset German stability. But if they don't, and if this is the maximum that the AFD gets, then they're just going to be kept out of power. I mean, Sergeant Schultz already came out yesterday and said, oh, we must all get together and keep out the AFD. And this is something very similar to what they did in France. After Marine Le Pen's national rally did well, everybody immediately declared, well, we're just going to unite and keep them out. And then they did a lot of tactical voting, And as a result of the tactical voting, they're dropping out and so on, they were able artificially to boost the non-national rally vote. It was kind of artificial, a fake, to boost their vote or their representation in the National Assembly, and thereby keep the national rally out. So although the national rally won more votes than anyone else in the second round of the French election, they didn't. They got fewer seats in Parliament than than many of the other parties, and so they were able to. They were kept out. And so something similar is going to happen. I mean, as things stand, the most that the AFD can hope for in Thuringia is that they can put a stop to any constitutional amendments in Thuringia. If you get a third of the representatives in Parliament, you can do that, and they can stop the appointment of state judges. But that's about it. They're not going to get any governmental seats. Now, obviously there are flies in the ointment there, because it's not immediately obvious that the non-establishment, that the establishment parties can themselves form a government, because they don't have the seats. So they would need to rope in this Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, which is Sarah Wagenknecht's party, because they're willing to work with her, but they're not willing to work with the AFD. And curiously enough, the Christian Democrats seem to really hate the Die Linke, the left party. They're not prepared to work with the Die Linke, but they are willing to work with Sarah Wagenknecht. Now, that was a very interesting question, because Wagenknecht has said that she would only join a government, a state government, if the Christian Democrats, because these will obviously be governments led by the Christian Democrats, if the Christian Democrats promised to change policy towards Ukraine, in essentially to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Now, that's going to be very difficult, because the Christian Democrats are even more hawkish on Ukraine than Sergeant Schultz is. They've been pushing for the dispatch of the Taurus missiles to Ukraine, and where Schultz has sort of hemmed and hawed and sort of dragged his feet, and is not at all keen on it. Nonetheless, the Christian Democrats are pushing for it. So it would be a major change of policy on the part of the Christian Democrats for them to abandon that. Now, it's hard to see how this can in any way be a condition of forming a government in a state, because basically state governments don't do foreign policy. The federal government does foreign policy. So it's hard to say, well, we'll only enter the government if Christian Democrats abandon the policy on Ukraine. Well, how can you do that? I mean, first of all, the Christian Democrats are not in power, so that point is moot. But second of all, what does it even mean within the context of a state government? What can a state government do about Ukraine? But if she's just bullshitting, and she is going to join a government, just in order to keep out the AFD, I think she would be making a huge mistake. I think it would be an absolute disaster for her. I mean, her best position would be stay out of government, and wait for the federal elections in a year's time. Um, because at the moment, the Sarah Wagenknecht's party and the AFD are in a way competing for the same block of votes. Um, and so um, they in order to keep and expand that block of votes, it's best to keep out of government and then wait for some big changes. If she enters the government, then she'll look like an opportunist, and then I think she would cease to be any kind of a rival to the AFD, and then the AFD would once again be, well, we are the only true nationalist party in Germany. We are the only party that's really against immigration. We are the only anti-war party. We are the only party that cares about German deindustrialization and so on. But at the moment, some of their thunder has been stolen by Sarah Wagenknecht. Um, anyway, let's go on. Mr. Wonderful sends the plane snatch, the Maduro plane snatch, amounts to theft. Yep, it does. It is similar to what happened when Putin came to the aim of Donbass to steal from Russians and Russia. I don't get the analogy, to be honest. Yeah, maybe you can explain. I don't know what it is. Stone River says the homage that politicians pay to the middle class seems to give short shrift to the salt of the earth working class. Yeah, it's very interesting that somehow you're only allowed to say about the middle class. We need to grow the middle class. We need to grow the middle class. It leads to the worst, stupidest policies. I mean, like back in the 90s, and then of course in the early 2000s. First the Clinton administration and then the Bush administration were pushing for home ownership. Home ownership. Oh, we need to have more and more home ownership because we need to grow the middle class. Everyone has to has to own a home, even though it's not necessarily such a great idea to own a home because for all sorts of reasons it gives you more headaches than they're worth. But nonetheless, that was the idea. We need a middle class, a strong middle class, and therefore we need home ownership. But of course, they pushed this home ownership, doling out mortgages to all sorts of people who had no means whatsoever to pay their mortgages. And then, of course, inevitably, there was the housing bubble, and of course, the housing bubble burst. Harris seems to be going along the same path by this $25,000 credit for first-time home buyers. So again, this part of it, because I think that will also just lead to a housing bubble. I mean, anytime you just do something, boost something like that, then again, you're going to push people to buy homes and again borrow money, and then which they then can't pay back, and once again you have a bubble. Now, but your point about the salt of the earth working class is very interesting, because you used to say things like working class. Now, after a while, the term working class acquired a certain negative connotation because it was associated with Marxism. And so when you talked about the working classes, then that sounded like one of these ferocious people who were ready to seize power and impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. So it was not a good term that you could go around, the working class, because then you say, I don't want to have anything to do with them. They're scary. But then once Marxism was kind of safely in the rear view mirror, Then there was another term which was working people, which was much more anodyne. So someone like Tony Benn, the great tribune of the Labour left, I mean, he would always talk about working people. The Labour Party is the party of working people. And the working people, of course, is a very loose term, because ultimately working people covered everybody, including Ben himself, who came obviously from a very prosperous, well-to-do family, and his father had been, he'd been a prominent Labour politician, and he'd been awarded a hereditary peerage for his services, which peerage then Ben himself rejected in order to maintain his seat in the House of Commons. But Ben nonetheless talked about working people, and so working people included him. He had money, but obviously, he didn't spend his days lying around in bed. He was doing some work. So he'd say, yeah, I'm a working person. The Labour Party advances the interests of somebody like me. So working people was quite nice. But that term has also gone out of fashion. And so we got this thing, the middle class. I find it quite nauseating. I absolutely find this coinage middle class repugnant. Partly I think for what you said, that somehow you have to be in this class. Heaven forbid that you should be somewhere else, because then you would be slipping into something. So you go, well, we have to grow the middle class. And you say, well, what about the others? What about the people who are not in the middle class? Oh, I don't care about them. Or at least I'll just call them middle class for the sake of argument. So we're only concerned with the middle class. That's it. Nobody else matters. Just the middle class. Nobody who's below. Nobody who's above. About whoever's above. Well, those are the billionaires. But anyway. But that leads to the this term when you get some creep like Keir Starmer, who talks about, my dad was a toolmaker. My dad was a toolmaker, and my mother was a nurse. Now, when he says these things, originally the idea was that we're supposed to admire him because his dad was a toolmaker, and therefore he had dragged himself up by his bootlaces. But it's a way of despising your parents, because ultimately, what the hell does it matter that your dad was a toolmaker? I mean, obviously, it's a highly skilled job. Whether he was well paid or not well paid, I don't know. I mean, obviously, he was quite well paid. I mean, Starmer was one of, I think, 4 children. His mother's a nurse, so that's a pretty good job. Together, they had 4 children, had a nice, well, for want of a better term, middle class lifestyle. Why is that something to be ashamed of? Why is that something to think, well, boy, I've really done well for myself because my dad was a toolmaker? It's really repulsive, and people always do that. They always try to tear down the accomplishments of their parents just in order to show how well they've done. Oh yeah, I grew up in poverty. You didn't grow up in poverty. You're absolute crap. You never grew up in poverty. You had a pretty decent, working class lifestyle. You didn't grow up in poverty. Oh, I was so poor. What did you do? Oh, my father was, worked on the docks. Okay, so he worked on the docks. So that's a pretty good job. I mean, it's not an elite job, but who cares? I mean, that's the point. I mean, it's a job. It doesn't matter whether your dad was a toolmaker, or your dad was a dustman, or your dad was a caretaker, or a concierge, or whatever. I mean, he earned a living, and he helped bring up a family. But it's this way, this auto proletarianization that people engage in, that they have to always talk down and drag down the accomplishments of their parents. They have to show, well, I really came from a humble background. Oh, I'm very, very humble. Like Uriah Heep, oh, I'm very humble. You went in any way humble. So just going back to your point, Stone River, I just find the whole term middle class. It's just something about it. It's grating. It's truly grating. Much prefer if you say working class again. That's okay. I mean, there's a little bit of a kind of let's recall the good old days of organized labor. It's rather forced these days because there isn't really much organized labor. The good old days of Marxism, but at least the anodyne term "working people" it's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Just say yeah, working people. We're here to help working people. I don't mind it. But when you say, well, I only care about the middle class, then you say, well, why? Why are you only caring about that? Why? Because somehow I have to think that, well, I'm in the middle class, so I'm not one of these grubby proletarians. So I'm in the middle class, and look, all the things the government is going to do for me. But apparently, you can't. You only have self-respect if you're a member of the middle class. Otherwise, the hell with you. Hugh Keenan, shirt brilliant blue or dark purple? I don't know. I don't know. It's blue, but it's not brilliant. Definitely not brilliant. Um, and then Mr. Wonderful says, I like the idea of somebody referring to themselves as Mr. Wonderful. And then Maduro was democratically elected into office, and even after scrutiny, the Supreme Court confirmed his victory. I agree with you. I'm not convinced by the claim of fraud. So I agree with himself. He won an election, but of course the United States never accepts election results. It's automatic. I mean, there's going to be an election in Venezuela, and the United States is not going to accept that result. So that was just it. Doesn't matter what the results are. And so Cynthia, always good to see you. Thank you for yesterday for having all of your comments and fascinating information. So we had another one of our Monday night film screenings, and we were screening Chinatown, Roman Polanski's 1974 classic, and so it's still up on the Gaggle locals board. So if you want to catch up on Chinatown, you can see it, and then when you see it, you can read Cynthia's many fascinating details about the making of the film and the actors and the production and so on. So really interesting. So please look that up. Anyway, Cynthia talking about yesterday's film. She says, I find it strange that not only was Catherine having an affair with her stepfather, but Evelyn didn't seem bothered at all about the affair. So do you think that since Catherine was a product of incest, Catherine was having an affair with her stepfather, but Evelyn didn't seem at all bothered about the affair. Okay. So do you think that since Catherine was a product of incest, knowingly or not, it drove her to become a sexual deviant of sorts? And since Evelyn engaged in incest, especially was concerned consensual and not rape, which some film analysts have argued, could that explain her indifference to her daughter's affair with her husband? I mean, it's a very, very good question. I thought, I've always thought in that film there was something very odd about Evelyn's, apparent indifference to her husband having an affair with essentially, her daughter. I mean, the way I explained that was simply that she really didn't love um, Hollis Mulray. I mean, she it was a marriage of convenience. It was obviously a marriage that was encouraged by her father, and then obviously her husband. It was a good marriage for her husband, but she really didn't love her husband at all. So she couldn't be bothered. Um, if her daughter um, was happy with that. Um, it's not made clear in the film. I mean, but maybe Cynthia, you can correct me. It's not made clear in the film whether Hollis Mulray was aware that this young woman he was seeing was his wife's daughter. That did he know that this was his stepdaughter? It's still not incest. You can have in his case. I mean, you can have an affair with your stepdaughter. That wouldn't be incest because they're still you don't share DNA, so that wouldn't be an issue. Um, and but it's not clear whether I mean, obviously it was Evelyn had brought the two of them together, but it's not clear that Hollis Mulray knew that Catherine was his stepdaughter. Um, Now, but I think Evelyn just thought, look, if she makes my husband happy, good. I mean, if they're both happy, I don't think she was too bothered by that. And as I say, that wouldn't be incest, if the stepfather and the daughter, a stepfather and his stepdaughter having an affair, and that's in a sense, I'm not a fan of Woody Allen, to say the least. I'm not a huge fan of his films or his character, but I think he was a little bit unfairly attacked somehow, that he was having an affair with his stepdaughter. But and eventually he married her. Because she really wasn't his stepdaughter. So in any case, there's no real incest. Even if she were his stepdaughter, there wouldn't be any incest in it. But she wasn't his stepdaughter. He had never. First of all, Alan was never married to Mia Farrow, but also he had never adopted Sun Yi. I think that's her name, Sun Yi. He had never adopted her. She was adopted by Mia Farrow's previous husband. This is Andre Previn. That's why she had the name Sunyi Previn. So he had adopted her, but Alan had never adopted Sunyi. So there really wasn't any incest there, and he wasn't. He didn't have an affair with his uh, stepdaughter. And somebody mentioned this, and because we talked yesterday in the during the film about Polanski's legal problems. Um, and obviously the comparison between his legal problems and then Woody Allen's legal problems. If you make that comparison, again, I'm not a fan of Allen, but Polanski's case is a much worse, much more serious case than Allen's, because first of all, Polanski raped this 13-year-old girl. I mean, basically, there was no ands, ifs, and buts. There was never any question about that. I mean, this was reported immediately to the police by the girl and her mother. He was arrested. He was prosecuted, and then something very interesting happened. That this was this is the 1970s, the mid 1970s. And this was Los Angeles. They like their celebrities, and this was still the tail end of the 60s, and the sexual revolution. So basically, the judge and the prosecutor tentatively agreed with Polanski essentially to give him a tap on the wrist. He'll plead guilty to something minor. He wouldn't have to do any time, and then basically the whole thing would be over. And so that was the agreement. And then Polanski, uh, being the sort of creepy character that he is, said, "Well, I got to go back to Europe and finish a film. I'm filming something in Europe, so I'll go back to Europe, finish off this film, and then I'll come back, plead guilty, and then the whole thing will just we'll put the whole thing to bed." And the judge agreed and said, "Okay, yeah, go back to Europe, and and then finish off your film, and then come back." So Polanski goes back to Europe to finish off this film, and then the Los Angeles media, started publishing these photographs of Polanski having a whale of a time in Europe. There was photographs of him cavorting with buxom babes, for want of a better expression, having a good time. And this was a little bit much for the media. I mean, this is, he had basically been convicted. I mean, he had pleaded guilty. He had pleaded guilty to raping a 13-year-old girl. And there he is, apparently with the consent of the Los Angeles legal authorities, having a whale of a time in Europe. So the prosecutor went to see the judge. It was an ex parte meeting, and he said, "Well, we can't have this. I mean, this is a serious business, and we're getting absolutely killed in the media with all these stories about Polanski having a good time in Europe." And so we go, basically he's going to have to do some time. We can't do just a tap on the wrist isn't going to do it. He's going to have to do some time for what he did. And the judge seemed to agree with that. And then Polanski got wind of this. So just as he was about to return to the United States, he got wind of this, that he was likely to go to prison for what he did. And said, "No, I'm not going back." And he never came back to Europe for essentially the sentencing. And that was it. And that was it. He's never been back to the United States. So that was what, 77, 78. So he has never been back to the United States. So everything was really very unsatisfactory because essentially he never really paid any price at all for his for what he did. And then he gave all sorts of interviews subsequent years about how he was badly treated by the Americans, and the Americans are also puritanical, and the usual European Euro trash baloney about America, completely oblivious to the fact of what he did. This, "Oh, well, she's 13, she knew what she was doing," and so on and so forth. I mean, in a way she did, but in a way, obviously she didn't. She was 13. She was very, very young. You see the pictures of her then. She looks very young. She looks like a 13-year-old girl. But so he's gone on whining about that over the years, about how badly he was treated by the Americans. And after all I did for them, I made Chinatown. And then, but I was going back to why his case is much worse than Allen's, because the Allen case was brought by Mia Farrow, and Farrow claimed that that this girl, this very young girl, 7 years old, so had been sexually molested by Allen. And this they went through a lot of examination, legal examination, psychiatric examinations. It went through there was a very extensive process. in which was examined whether there was any truth to the allegation that he had sexually molested this 7-year-old girl. And basically, they concluded that there's just no evidence for it. Now, the girl, now she's of course a young woman, Dylan. She insists. She absolutely hates Alan. She insists that, oh yeah, he sexually molested me, but she has no recollection of this, and that was always the problem when all the psychiatrists and judges and everyone interviewed her, that she really had no recollection of any of these acts on the part of Alan. And so ultimately, basically, the courts just said, well, there's nothing, we don't have any evidence against Alan. And Alan and Soon-Yi have themselves adopted children. And I have to say, I don't think they would have been allowed to adopt any children if the courts believed that there was any truth to the stories about Alan's sexual abuse of children. For them to allow them to adopt children means that they basically said there's just no evidence. Absolutely no evidence. This was just Mia Farrow really hated him, truly loathed him with a passion, and she was just out to get him with making these claims about sexually abusing this girl. Just like she insisted that the boy Ronan Farrow, who Alan had been led to believe was his son. Then she said, no, he's not his son. That's Frank Sinatra's son. He was Frank Sinatra. He used to come round to my place, and we had a high old time of it, behind Woody's back, of course. And so yeah, he's basically he's Frank's son. I don't, who knows what the truth of that is, and there's been no DNA test as to whether he is Sinatra's son or not. Which itself is interesting, because it would be very easy to establish whether he's Sinatra's son or whether he's Woody Allen's son. And the reason why there have been no DNA tests is because it's not in the interest of Farrow to have a DNA test. Because if she were to have the DNA test, and it was established that he was actually Sinatra's son, then Woody can turn around and say, well, I've been paying all this money for his upbringing, and went to all these colleges and schools and everything. It cost me a lot of money. You've been milking me for years for this boy, somebody you knew was not my son. So Farrow would be kind of legally liable, say, I lied to everybody, I tricked everybody in order to squeeze money out of a man, who was not this boy's father. So that's why she has no interest at all in doing a DNA test. And I guess Woody has no interest in the DNA test, because I think he probably likes the idea of, of having, produced a son. But he hates Woody as well. I mean, they all seem to hate him. That's is interesting. But Alan, again, I don't have much sympathy for him, because he had kind of exploited a lot of these young women. They were of age. They weren't 13, as with Polanski, but nonetheless, it was borderline. And some of the women have claimed that in fact they were underaged. So he was doing that for years and years and years, and eventually it was bound to catch up with him. And you can't just go on, bedding, 15, 16-year-olds, and then think that it's not going to catch up with you. And so it has. I mean, it caught up with Alan, and it's really hurt his reputation badly. It probably irretrievably, because it's now, I mean, he's quite old now, so whenever he departs, this is this is all going to be kind of a major part of the obituaries. Anyway, somewhat off topic. Anyway, now it was so when you think, going back to Cynthia's question, is Catherine a deviant or not? As I say, I don't think so, because first of all, there's nothing basically wrong. I mean, it's a bit weird, obviously, to have an affair with your stepfather, but it's not incest um, as such. So it's not. I just don't think it's exactly deviant. Um, and as for Hollis Mulray, we don't really know how much he knew about who Catherine was. Um, um, Now, what you said about Evelyn engaged in incest, especially if it was consensual. Well, that's a very good question. I don't know what the law was at the time. When she said this in yesterday's film, she said she was 15 when she had Catherine. When Catherine was born, she was had to be 14 or 15 when she had her affair with her father. Um, that's statutory rape. I mean, the consensual aspect of it doesn't count. I mean, that because she was obviously underage, and it's so it counts as statutory rape, um, and um, and obviously the father, in normal circumstances, would be um, legally liable, but he kind of owned the town, so he could get away with it. But I don't know to what extent anyone knew about it. I mean, he obviously didn't want to talk about it. Evelyn didn't want to talk about it. But so I mean, even in the film, she says it sounded like they took the child away from her. So she didn't really raise the child. So they seem to uh, they seem to kind of come together relatively recently. I mean, at least that was the impression in the film. So it's not like, oh, she's been looking after this child ever since she was a baby. It sounded like she ran away, then she came back, but the child was kept away from her. It's not clear who was bringing up the child, but it wasn't Evelyn. Um, I'm not buying from given the age that you said that this is in any way consensual. I mean, this wasn't consensual. I mean, this is statutory rape. So, um, um, yeah. But anyway, Cynthia goes on. Yesterday, I said that forgetting Jake, it's Chinatown, has become a mantra in Hollywood for those who have been burnt or snubbed by the industry. The implication being that it's better to let it go than make an issue of it, because that's just how the industry works. But in the movie, the line is about the futility of fighting injustices and darkness in the world. It's about giving up and looking away, because nothing can be done anyway, lest you become another casualty of injustice. I think that's, yeah, I think that's right. I think that's how it is in the film. But what I was saying about that phrase is that Chinatown still doesn't have anything to do with. I mean, you're right. That's the meaning of that expression. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. But if you think about the film, I mean, there are two aspects in that film. I mean, there's the story of these gangsters. The head of which is Noah Cross, played by John Huston. There's gangsters who are basically just making out like bandits with the water supply, that they were just buying up land and making huge amounts of money on these orange grove, driving out the impoverished farmers who are under the impression that there's no water there, but there's in fact plenty of water. So they drive them out, and they're going to make a killing on this. because they're buying the land for nothing, and then of course it'll become very very prosperous, fertile land in no time at all. So there's that story. But then there's obviously the incest story. So these are the two interlocking stories of real sleaze and corruption and evil, as embodied by this creepy figure of Noah Cross. So that's what the film's about. But Chinatown really doesn't play much of a role in the film. So you know, well, here's the title, Chinatown. And while the film ends in Chinatown, Chinatown just doesn't have play much of a role in this. It's not like, well, everything matters because it's all about Chinatown. It's not. And that's why I found the ending a little bit well, and it's not. I think not. I didn't find the ending not unsatisfactory. Now, the ending is fine. It's more. I think the title. I don't get the title. I don't quite know why. Why do you call the film Chinatown when Chinatown really is peripheral to the story, the two interlocking stories of the film? So that was my issue. But no, the ending was fine, and I think you, Cynthia, were very observant, and I'd always miss that when she gets a bullet in the eye, that it's supposed to make you think about Oedipus and the Oedipus who plucked his eyes out when he found out that he had slept with his mother. And I think that I didn't think of that, but yeah, that's the incest motif there. But Oedipus did it as soon as he found out about this. I mean, she'd known about this for a long time, but nonetheless, that's the motive. And I didn't even think of that. I'd want all these years. I'd wondered why she gets shot through the eye, but that's really interesting. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you for these questions and for your generosity. Thank you. And then Mary Grossman says, Ari, the film club. I tried to watch an earlier film and it was not there. Hence, go to Amazon and pay. It should be there. Everything should be there because all of the movies of the film club have all been uploaded onto locals. So everything that we have screened should be there. Maybe that the film was reviewed, and I used to review the films before posting them, and maybe I didn't post the film, so that's why it's not there. But the films we have done have all been they should be there on locals. And Steve Brown, thank you very much for your generosity. Best wishes to Gagglers. Best wishes to you. Thank you so much. Mary, thank you. Yes, Steve says George is going to be rich. Well, look, I would be rich if the money was coming to me, but as you know, the money goes to the dogs. They don't share anything. You got to remember those hounds. They don't share anything. They just say, yeah, and what else? I'll take this. What else have you got? So I don't get anything. So and worst of all, they're so ungrateful. You think, hey, wait, aren't you, please, so many people have, contributed. No, it's just not enough for them. And Mr. Wonderful says, even Volkswagen is about to go out of business in Germany thanks to the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. Yes, that's right. That's the news today, that Volkswagen, for the first time in its history, is planning on closing a plant in Germany. Now, it's never done that. I mean, it's really one of the big signature industries in Germany, Volkswagen, like as with Mercedes-Benz and so on. But yeah, Volkswagen says closing down a plant. The energy costs in Germany are horrendous. Germany, basically is in recession. Negative growth rate one quarter after another. And basically Germany shot itself in the foot by saying no to cheap energy. I mean, its economy is based on getting cheap energy from Russia. It's not getting it anymore. And then people wonder, well, why is the traffic light coalition so unpopular in Germany? It's historically unpopular. I mean, I don't think there's been any government in Germany in recent times that's been as unpopular as Sergeant Scholz's, and that's because he's dragging Germany down into the toilet. I mean, all the things that I said about how people have a nostalgia for the Germany of old, the Wilhelmine Germany. But at least, I mean, even if you don't want to go back to the Wilhelmine Germany, you can still go, well, what about the Germany of the 70s or Germany of the 80s? Because you say, well, at least we were prosperous. At least, well, we still had our great manufacturing industry. We were admired the world over, because of our fantastic manufactured products with this huge reputation. Now we don't have any of that. And Scholz is completely incapable of addressing that problem. And this war is clearly not popular in Germany. Germans do not want to get involved in this war in Ukraine. Scholz has pursued it, even though it's obvious to the Germans that there's absolutely no German national interests involved. But nonetheless, Scholz has gone ahead with it, and now he's presiding over this German deindustrialization. And you think, well, yeah, that's why he's doing so badly in the election. And how does Scholz respond? Scholz just responds, well, this is a terrible time for Germany. We must rally around. All the democratic parties must rally around and keep out of power the Alternative für Deutschland. He's a sort of a Keir Starmer-like figure. I mean, they're very similar, very drab, dreary, dull figures, no ideas, no imagination. And really have no other ideas other than to lecture and rebuke their own people. So, I mean, when you think of Germany since the war, I mean, you basically had these governments that would just go on and on and on. Very, very few changes in government. I mean, so, you have the era that starts in 1949, this sort of Adenauer, the dominated by the Christian Democrats. So you have Adenauer, and then you have Erhard, and then you had the Nazi guy, Kiesinger. So that goes on from about 1949 through to 1969, 20 years of dominance by the Christian Democrats. And then finally, the Social Democrats get in, and then you got Willy Brandt, and then got Helmut Schmidt, and that went on. That's another 13 years until 1982, and then in 1982, that change of government did not even come about because of an election. It just simply that the Free Democrats had abandoned the Social Democrats and joined forces with Helmut Kohl's Christian Democrats, and so boom, Kohl was now chancellor. And that went on for another 16 years, till 1998, until again the Social Democrats went from 1998 to 2005. Anyway, and then of course you have Merkel. Merkel was there from 2005 through to what, 2021? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No, so the point is that Germany was marked by this real stability. You don't get too many changes of government. But that's gone. That's gone. I think it was okay as long as these governments delivered. There may not be very thrilling people. Helmut Kohl, no one had ever accused Helmut Kohl of being a charismatic figure. No one had, thought Adenauer or Erhard were charismatic figures. Brandt and Schmidt, maybe they were quite charismatic, but that was But now German politics could be quite interesting. You've got now these new parties, on the left and the right. So we'll see what happens. Whether they're going to make an impact. They're obviously making an impact in the East. but they need to make a breakthrough in the West, and that I just I don't know whether they can do that. But one thing we do know, and that's that the Traffic Light Coalition will be defeated in next September's election because um, the Greens are totally discredited. Nobody wants the Greens again. I mean, they ruined Germany. They destroyed Germany's industrial base with their hatred for industry, which is absolutely national suicide. Hating industry, their crazy energy policies, the crazy war policies. So they've been an absolute calamity, a total blight on Germany. And maybe finally the Greens will just be wiped out, wiped away from existence, which is long past due. So that they'll be gone. I think the Free Democrats, everyone's had it pretty up to here with the Free Democrats. They never win any votes, but they're always in the government. And then we have obviously Sergeant Schultz and so on. So the problem, of course, as I was saying earlier, is that the Christian Democrats are a problem. I mean, as long as they keep banging on about keeping this war in Ukraine going, then they're going to be a disaster for Germany as well. So maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe German politics will become interesting again. Anyway, Marty, thank you so much for your generosity. He says, "Happy Tuesday, George and Gagglers," and it's a nice picture of geese, a gaggle of geese. Um, Thank you so much. Thank you, Marty. Um, and thank you for all of your postings from old films and old TV shows. It's really nice to see them. Anyway, Essie Delendam says Rathenau said nobody wanted the French imposed Weimar Constitution. It's the thread permanently plunging the country into an unraveled unity of a strong state in favor of endless factions. Oh, I think that's right. I think Weimar never acquired any real legitimacy in Germany. It was seen as a government imposed on Germany. And obviously, I mean, there was the terrible economic policies that were pursued, which led to the inflation, and led then to the great crash and the economic collapse of the crash. But Weimar never, there was a brief flurry during the sort of Briand-Stresemann era of the late 1920s, when it seemed like the Germans were coming to terms with Weimar, but again, that was very, very weak. Wondering what it has to say, though, about Weimar, which was, eventually, that policy that they pursued, Chancellor Brüning, which is a brutal austerity policy, it was working. It eventually did work in Germany, and the Germans kind of priced themselves into jobs. It was a very bitter pill to swallow. But because of the German economic recovery, that was Hitler was able to claim that he was this master, he was this genius, the genius who solved Germany's economic problems. But the truth was that Germany was already recovering very strongly in 1931-32. So by the time he became chancellor in January 33, German economy was already doing well, which is why Hitler's party was already slumping in the polls just as he was made chancellor. And so it was, and in fact, because of the policies of Chancellor Brüning, Germany did much better during the 1930s than any other country. The United States didn't recover from the Great Depression until World War II. The British also didn't recover until close to World War II. Germany alone was doing really well in the 1930s. which again, as I say, Hitler took credit for. Anyway, uh, Steve Brown says AFD supports the genocidal state big time. And by the way, Germany is only second to the failed former United States with regard to supplying weapons to Israel. You know, you know, AFD hasn't been that outspoken in its support for Israel, and I don't know really that um, the support for Israel is absolutely categorical across the political spectrum in Germany. Every single political party, every political faction supports Israel, but I don't notice that the AFD um, is so fervently pro Israel. Um, it's true that obviously the AFD is bête noire, is the are the Muslims, and they don't like the Muslim migrants and so on. And, similar in France, but I haven't noticed that the AFD is that much more pro-Israel than Annalena Baerbock, Sergeant Schultz. I mean, it's just you can't be any kind of a political figure in Germany today that it isn't 100% for Israel. And again, that's a relatively recent thing. I mean, even back in the 70s and 80s, West German politicians were not in bed with Israel. I mean, again, Willy Brandt during the Yom Kippur War, he, along with the other Europeans, said that United States cannot use European airspace to replenish Israel's arms. So basically, they had to go around Germany. And then Helmut Schmidt, at the time of the Israel's invasion of Lebanon in '82, Schmidt was very critical of Israel, and got a lot of stick from Israel because, again, well, if it's a German who's criticizing us, Nazi, and there was a lot of that, calling Helmut Schmidt a Nazi. I mean, remember, in those days, at least, those kinds of attacks had a certain resonance because Schmidt had served in World War II. I mean, he was very young, obviously, but nonetheless, he had served in World War II. So when they accused Schmidt of being a Nazi, I mean, it had, that had some resonance. But now, we're now way far from World War II, and now it's completely unacceptable to offer any criticisms of Israel. So you would have thought it would be the other way around. The more Germany moves away from World War II and Hitler and everything, the Germans would actually be freer in their criticism of Israel. But no, it's got much worse. Anyway, I don't notice that this is such an important part of the AFD. I think some of the kind of European right-wing nationalist kind of parties are much more supportive of Israel. I mean, obviously, Viktor Orban is one. Marine Le Pen, again, very much, fervent Israel supporter. Geert Wilders, another big Israel fan, and Nigel Farage. So they're all absolutely, they go, oh, fantastic, the Israel, Israel is sort of the paradigm of the nation state. Israel is somehow fighting our enemies, our enemies who are, the Islamists and Israel and Israel's agents in Europe are very, very good at playing this game of, our enemies are your enemies, our enemies, Islamic fundamentalists, a bunch of crazy jihadis, these are the people we're fighting, and they're your enemies, they're the people you're fighting, quietly forgetting the support Israel has given to jihadis. But if that's enough to persuade the some on the right, that's where that they're fighting. So unfortunately, the right has got very confused. The European right has got very confused about this. and convince themselves that somehow Israel is doing God's work, and and fighting against the people that they're fighting against. Oh yeah, we don't like globalism. Yeah, well, Israel's against globalism. Yeah, we don't like the UN. Oh, Israel's against the UN. We don't like the World Health Organization. Oh, Israel's against that. Completely untrue. But that's something that Israel is very good at playing on their susceptibilities. Um, so Steve Brown's got a very nice picture. This is of a black cat. It's a very nice black cat. That's a very, very sweet. Yeah, cats are a lot sweeter than dogs. I think. I mean, they don't really go for your throat. If you don't deliver on money and food and everything. The dogs just choke. They go for the chokehold. Anyway, NKMRD says the AFD never presented much of an anti-US or anti-Israel attitudes, as far as I know. It doesn't feel like sovereignty is on the table. Again, as I say, they certainly are not anti-Israel. I'm not saying they're anti-Israel. I just don't see that they are more pro-Israel than anyone else in Germany. I mean, it's just all across the spectrum. I think if you're a party on the right in Germany, you're going to get called a Nazi, whatever you do. So Nazi, anti-Semitic, whatever you do. So it makes sense for a party of the right to inoculate itself from these charges and support Israel. I mean, I'm saying it's exactly noble, but you can see why. Hey, if they're going to call me Nazi, I better have an argument against it. And what's the argument? Oh, yeah, hey, who can be more pro-Israel than us? We love Israel, so how can I be a Nazi? I mean, it's not a bad argument, because it's the argument Zelensky and Zelensky's champions use. Well, how can Ukraine be a Nazi if its president is a Jew? So same way the AFD. Well, how can we be Nazis if we're such lovers of Israel? So there's a political opportunism there. Now, are they anti-US? I think they are anti-US. Now, they're not. I mean, it's a very interesting question. I mean, they're not as anti-US as Zara Wagenknecht, the Bündnis Zara Wagenknecht, because she really came out of the East German Communist Party and then became the party of the left, and she is part of the anti-NATO left in Germany. That's where the scene out of which she emerged. So yeah, there's no question she is anti-American. Now, the AFD, which is on the right, or the right in Germany, has been by and large pro-American. There's since World War II, there really hasn't been any strong movement on the right which was anti-American. I mean, you had some figures on the right, Franz Josef Strauss, who would quibble about this or that about the Americans, but by and large, the right in Germany, said, hey, the enemy is communism, the enemy is the Soviet Union, America's here to defend us, we need America against the threat from the East. And that's been the attitude of the right in Germany, and I guess the AfD is a part of that. But I think that can change. I don't think that that's set in stone, that the AfD will not be very anti-American. I think the AfD, if they can build, I mean, and that's a big if, so they can build on their success and try to expand into Western Germany, I think they will need to, and they'll need to have a bigger agenda. I mean, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be that much to the AfD other than opposition to migrants. Now, it's obviously a part of a much bigger critique. I mean, opposition to migrants and national sovereignty, maintaining your borders, not to follow the lead of others, whether it's the EU or the United States. But so far the AFD hasn't formulated a much bigger, much wider, more broad-ranging agenda, something comparable to Zara Wagenknecht. And I think it could be a source of vulnerability for the AFD, because unless there's more to you than just being against immigration, whether both legal and illegal, then I think you'll just fade away. I mean, you can only become a serious political movement if you offer a much more broad-ranging critique, and they did have other critiques, like they were against the vaccine mandates and some of the lockdowns and all that. So they have other agenda, but you got to tackle the big issues. You've got to you got to go after NATO. You've got to go after U.S. hegemony over Germany, and until you do, I think you'll just be marginal, and so we'll see whether the AFD does it. But so I do agree, at the moment the AFD hasn't formulated a much more serious agenda, and maybe they're just afraid of their own shadow. I mean, as it is, the German state is threatening to outlaw them altogether. So if they were to come out against America, come out against NATO, I think they would be just banned. I think they would be, I mean, I think it could be banned anyway. But I think if they were to combine opposition to migration, opposition to vaccines, opposition to COVID hysteria, and opposition to NATO, opposition to the United States, that combination will be enough to get the Verfassungsschutz Amt, I think, is it Verfassungsschutz? Yeah, the domestic intelligence service. They'll come after them and say, "That's it. They need to be banned." So they're in a tricky position. So anyway, SC Dillendam says America and the UK seem somewhat oddball states, but they set the global norms. Of course, George has the same as some UK formation. I agree. I mean, they set the global norms, and I think a lot of people, a lot of people that we're in sympathy with, are too eager to assume that what they want to be true is true, and that somehow already America's a diminished power. No one really cares about America anymore. No one cares about the UK anymore. Well, nobody probably does care about the UK, but together they still call the shots. I mean, challenging the hegemony of the Anglo-Saxon, that's going to be a big project. It's not going to, you're not just going to do it next week and that's it. Multipolarity is already here, so that's it. We're Russia and China, are the top countries. It's not true. It'd be nice if it were true, but it's not. Anyway, Lenz Locke, I think he says, the left will always conspire with the center to keep out the right and maintain the status quo. Yeah, they always do that. They will always do that. And what happens then is, of course, that they will maintain their hegemony, and then it's always like that. Basically, the center left is always the dominant force. I mean, it's been the dominant force in the United States for years and years. It doesn't matter whether Republicans get to be presidents or Republicans win Congress and stuff. There's always the center left prevails. And again, I mean, we had, how many years we had of the Tories? The Tories won 2010. So we've had, is it 2010? Yeah, 14 years of the Tories. And it's like Labour was in power all this time. I mean, it's like a seamless transition from Johnson and Sunak and everyone into Starmer. I mean, it's like who even noticed that labor is in power. I mean, you think, well, I thought they were in power. I mean, so it's like it doesn't matter, whether you have the right is in power. I mean, it's always going to be the left was going to call the shots. Um, Cynthia says, but geese are only food to George, so maybe you shouldn't post that here. I do like geese, but to be honest, if it's a choice of meat between goose and duck, I much prefer duck to goose. I like the idea of goose. I think I kind of remember having goose for Christmas as a child, but it's not as good as duck. So, but sure, I mean, if I see them, it's like it's in this world of eat or be eaten. I say, that's food. And then Essay says, the least willing to fight for country, the most commercial. Lenslock says, nice shirt, though still baffled by the two lamps. Okay. I thought it's better, but I don't know. People don't seem to like it that much. Anyway, Mr. Wonderful says the Gaggle, Russia's planes were seized illegally in foreign countries under the claim of sanctions, as was 300 billion. Oh yeah, no, that 300 billion of Russian and civilians property. So the Russian planes, they weren't seized in a third country. I think it's simply that they weren't delivered to Russia, even though Russia had paid for the production of the planes, or I think it was aircraft. Yeah. So basically, the money was returned to Russia, but the aircraft that was built for Russia was not handed over. So it's not quite as bad as this. I mean, this was just theft in a third country. I mean, it had nothing whatever to do with the United States. Here it was just simply Russia had put in an order, and it was the order was fulfilled. It was the aircraft or whatever the helicopter or whatever was built. But then they said, we're not going to give it to Russia. We're just going to keep it for ourselves. So it wasn't as bad as this. However, the $300 billion of assets, that's pretty bad. But what was bad about that was the use of that money to fund Ukraine's war effort. And that's really gone far beyond anything that anyone had done before. So it's not unusual to freeze in other countries' assets in war. I mean, Britain did that to Nazi Germany's assets. But even the British didn't use Germany's assets to fund the British war effort. And here they said, well, we'll take this money and we're going to give it to Ukraine. That's unheard of. That's never been done. So that is particularly egregious. Stefan Sechur said, this is a Philistine conception of class. Marx insisted that class be considered as in relation to production. Yeah, I don't think I didn't say he didn't consider, but he did consider that the proletariat and the bourgeoisie were one owned the means of production, the other one worked in the means of production. But how it worked eventually was that the proletariat would grow and the bourgeoisie would continue to shrink. And then eventually the proletariat would take things over. Now, what was menacing about that was the notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat. I mean, as the term implies, it would be dictatorship. Now, it has a benign meaning. Yeah, but the proletariat would be the majority, so it would be the dictatorship of the majority, which is technically true. However, it's a dictatorship. It doesn't matter if it's a dictatorship of the majority. It means that you're going to have to undertake very, very strong actions against the minority, because the minority was everywhere and seeking to um, return the means of production to their uh, owners, to their, the defeated class as owners. And so that's why dictatorship of the proletariat is very nasty. Now, what I was saying about why the working class, because of the Marxist connotation, um, it had a menace to it. The people were afraid. I mean, when you used to have big industrial working classes in the United States and in Europe, people were nervous. They there were a lot of them, and the middle class was relatively sort of small next to them, and so now it moved in a more benign direction with social democracy, but it wasn't always obvious that that's how it's going to end up. It could end up in a kind of violent confrontation, and particularly in Europe, where in France and in Italy you had the industrial working classes and you had powerful communist parties. They dominated the working class in those countries, and even in Britain. I mean, although you had the Labour Party, but ultimately the trade unions themselves, had very, very powerful communists running them. So no one knew exactly how it was all going to shake out, particularly if there's going to be some economic crisis. Who knows what the working class would do? So it had a certain menace to it when you brought that up. Anyway, Robert, thank you very much for your generosity. Thank you, Robert. Says Wilde put it that work is the curse of the drinking classes. Yes, that's true. Yes, work is the curse of the drinking classes. Very, very well put. And then, Lenz Lark says working class doesn't really mean much in a post-industrial nation. I agree with you. I don't think it does, and that's why I think to say it. If some people still use that expression, but they are old kind of Marxists, who still feel a kind of nostalgia for the slogans of 100 years ago. There was just life used to be so much more fun when you could terrify people with the working classes. But then having said that, and just going back to my earlier point, then okay, well, let's think of some term. We can't call it working class. Then I don't have a problem with the coinage, working people, because then also we can bring in people who are working. I don't like the use of the middle class. I find that grating. There's something very smarmy about it, and ingratiating, and snobbish, and in every way, and kind of inverted snobbery. Oh, I love the middle classes. I'm not really one of them myself, but I love the middle classes, because I'm of course part of the sort of upper crust who go to cocktail parties in Washington. So I'm not a member of the middle class myself, but I love middle classes. So I just find it, and to be fair to Trump never uses that expression. So it's the Democrats who always use that expression. Mary says in business, personal change to human resources. Personal change to human resources with the categories such as packaging, supplies, equipment, etc. Well, that's right. Human resources are very interesting in corporations, because human resources is really a con job because workers, anyone who works at a corporation no longer has a union representing him. So you basically, who's going to look after my interests? Who's going to make sure that I get paid properly? Who's going to make sure that I don't get mistreated at the workplace? And so, human resources. Oh, that's human. Oh, great. I can go and complain to human resources. And it's a great con job, because people go to human resources and complain about, bad things that are done to them at the workplace. But they don't seem to realize that human resources is management. You are going to management and alerting management that you're a troublemaker. So when you go and complain about something, you are basically alerting the bosses that you are a problem. You're dissatisfied, you're disgruntled, you are likely to have a bad influence on your colleagues. And what does that mean? It means that the next time there are layoffs, and layoffs is the mother's milk to American corporation. Next time there are layoffs, you're the one who's going to be laid off. That's human resources. But it's just such a wonderful trick of making you believe that somehow human resources is batting for you in the way that trade unions used to go into bat for you. And Lenslark says, yeah, so the Bustelo Mozzaretti says basically the middle class in the U.S. died when the dreaded USSR fell in 1991. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's very astute. And then Lenslark says people tend to be underclass, middle class, or elites. Yeah, I like that. It has to be underclass, because if you say the middle class, then who isn't in the middle class? I mean, that's when when Biden and Harris, they talk about the middle class, then who doesn't belong there? I mean, I guess they can't really say working class, because they can't really then have disdain for the working class, because the working class supposedly works for the Democrats. I guess there's nothing. There's just this middle class, and then after the middle class, boom, it's like a sheer drop. There's nothing there, and then when they say the elites, then I guess the Democrats will say, "Oh yeah, the billionaires." Yeah, the billionaires, like Bernie Sanders, the billionaires are making a lot of money. The billionaires are making out like bandits. So it's basically the middle class and then the billionaires. And but the problem, of course, is that there aren't really that many billionaires. So you can't really have a class of billionaires. So essentially, then everybody is in the middle class. And then so Essay says, George, how much do you think willingness to fight the population is a sign of an anti-NATO attitude, of an anti-global liberalism? Habermas wrote an article on the West's red line dilemma. It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, the Western population have been lulled, because of ultimately a diet of sport, television, idiotic kind of spectacles, film, TV spectacles, show business. There's always some show business events, and I think they've been lulled into thinking that's all that really matters. And so I think that the public just isn't sufficiently aware of the disastrous nature of their leaders. How badly they are led, how badly they're being led to disaster. So Volkswagen comes along and says we're closing a plant in Germany, and you think, well, would that cause people in Germany to wake up? I mean, never in its history has Volkswagen closed a plant in Germany. Think, well, maybe something's going wrong. And again in Britain, I mean, you think the riots of last month, something's seriously going wrong. And you got these people, and Starmer and the rest of them who are openly telling them, "Oh, we don't have any money for your heating allowance. So I'm sorry if Granny is going to die this winter. Let's hope it's not going to be a too cold a winter. Maybe she'll make it. But there's plenty of money for Ukraine. It's always money for Ukraine. Same with the British elite, who today were weeping weeping about those hostages, the 6 hostages who who Hamas had killed. And again, it's kind of amazing that that's the front pages of the British media, not about what's going on in Britain, and there's a lot of very bad things going on there, but yeah, what's going on in the Middle East. So um, I feel ultimately is that until people get slapped on the back of the head hard, they're just going to go on in this very sleepy, somnambulist way of not realizing, where they're going, because it's nice and comfortable. And there's football. There's always football every day. There's football. So why worry about nuclear war when Manchester United is playing tomorrow? I don't know. I mean, I don't like thinking like that, because it just because ultimately you always feel like, well, hey, I'm saying that people are stupid, and I guess people aren't stupid, but I think they're being drugged um, by an irresponsible media, and they're doing it deliberately, and that's why things have got to this point, and no one seems to have put a stop to it. It should have been put a stop to a long time ago. We should not have got ourselves into this serious confrontation with Russia in Russia, inside Russia. So remember, inside Russia, NATO has invaded Russia. Oh, well, it's football tomorrow, so I don't have to worry about that. Anyway, Stefan says his dad produced surplus value. His mother lived off the surplus value. Did his mother live off? She's a nurse. What do you mean, mother? I mean, she's a nurse. She's producing surplus value. I mean, I mean, she a nurse. I mean, a nurse is producing. I mean, if uh, you're helping the sick working classes recover and get back into the workforce, you are adding value to the economy. Essay says Germany has low statistics on willingness to fight for Germany. Imagine communities. So yeah, probably that's probably true. That Germany has, yeah, it's become such a sort of denationalized, deracinated um, country, and always just they always want to be on the side of good, on the side of the angels. Oh God, we're concerned about the climate. Yeah, I mean, we're very worried about the climate. Anyway. Robert says the Brits' unwholesome obsession with class was perfectly captured in Keeping Up Appearances. Yeah, that was definitely that was. It's a peculiarity of the British system of class, and above all, accents, how you speak, um, and it's that whole very mannered um, uh, way of seeing, the manner, the kind of the house you live in, how you look after the hedge, the flowers you grow, and so on. So yeah, yeah. Keeping Up Appearances. Yeah, I remember that was a show from the 90s. It wasn't really my favorite show. It's one of those shows where they made a character as a constant figure of fun. Okay, you can do it for one episode, but you can't just have constantly making fun of this one character. Just it just becomes too much. So excess. Um, Lenslark says now there's rich and poor, educated and uneducated. That's about it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's educated. I don't know who's educated these days. Babs Habits, good to see you, Babs. He said, "Whoops, better late than never." Okay, you managed to get to us. So it's just whoops. I must set an alarm for 12 o'clock Pacific time. So 12 o'clock Pacific time. Okay, I mean that's that's just about the time we start. So okay, that's good. All right. But good to see you here. Um, uh, Mr. Wonderful says the gaggle with Peter George. I was given the name as a joke for reputably helping Katrina victims rebound from hardship and taking down a criminal website with millions of social security numbers. Okay. Okay. Anyway, okay. Cynthia then goes on. I know it's not incest. That's going back to what we were talking about with Chinatown. But most women would deeply resent their daughter having an affair with their husband, even if they don't love him. And most daughters that do probably don't love their mother. Well, that's a very, you have to then wonder how Evelyn saw Catherine, because remember she kept saying, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my sister, she's my daughter. So I think the fact that she kept saying it meant that ultimately she was torn as to whether she regarded the Catherine as a sister or her daughter, and so maybe when she kind of essentially encouraged this romance between her husband and Catherine, it was more like, well, it's a romance with her sister rather than with her daughter. Um, and in a way, it's still kind of keeping it in the family, and she may have been happy. Like at least it keeps it in the family, and he's not going off somewhere else. So it becomes a it's hard to know exactly, but I don't necessarily think that there was anything um, perverted in that. I think she just, you know, probably wanted to keep it in the family and didn't think there was anything so wrong if she can convince us, all right, well, he's having an affair with my younger sister. Anyway, she may well have thought of Catherine as a kind of younger sister. Um, so that's why, that's how I kind of think of it. Um, and I think she just really wanted Hollis to be happy. I mean, he was obviously very unhappy with her because she didn't really care for him at all. And thought, well, if Catherine makes him happy, then that'll be nice. I think it's a nice thought. Um, um, so Robert says the Masur seems to have the right idea, completely dispensing. The Masur has completely dispensing with marriage and monogamy in preference for the matrilineal extended family. The Masur have no words for either husbands or fathers. Kids live their life long on the matriarch's estate when there's a strict separation between life's utilitarian aspects and its romantic ones. sounds good. Um, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, um, it's a very interesting. I mean, I mean, in terms of the matrilineal aspect, I mean, we kind of accept the matrilineal aspect in terms of our nationality. Doesn't depend on the father, depending on the mother. And just like if you're Jewish, I mean, what matters is if your mother's Jewish, and if your father's Jewish, then you're out of luck. But we live on that. But in the case of the film on this, the incest is well, I mean, it's a particularly sleazy aspect of it. But I mean, what could be interesting, we will discuss at a later stage. I mean, it's too big a subject to get into. Is on the monogamy versus polygamy, and whether what what we have in the West, what we've kind of conjured up as a system of relationships, is really effective. I mean, it's clearly ineffective for all sorts of ways. Against a big subject, but the um, the very low birth rates in the West, very seriously low birth rates in the West, would indicate that the way we figured this monogamy and partnerships and whatever is obviously not working. Obviously, it's unsuccessful, um, and it's it's causing more and more discontent among more and more of the public. It just isn't really working out for too many people. The way this, what everyone calls it, the system of marriage or system of partnerships, it isn't. Too many people are unsatisfied by it, and then wonder how you can reform it. I mean, there are all sorts of ways one can think of it reform, but it does need to be reformed. I can't believe that what we have at the moment will survive, in another 20, 30 years. I mean, it's just, there's just too many people dissatisfied. And at least, where you have the arranged marriages, I mean, that is much more of a successful, effective way of breeding families. But the sort of the modern dating scene, I think that clearly is not working. Anyway, Stone River says, do we know for sure they were having an affair? This is going back to Chinatown. Could he just have been acting in a pastoral way with Evelyn's knowledge? I think that's a very fair point. We don't know for sure that they were having an affair, and Evelyn never really says they were having an affair. I mean, it's like, so, I mean, she was very young, Catherine. So, this is just an older man. I don't know, may not be entirely innocent, but nonetheless, he was still an older man, kind of looking after a young woman. So we don't know. I think I mean, she never denies that they're having an affair, but she never acknowledges that they're having an affair. So we don't actually know whether there was actually any kind of a relationship between them, anything more sexual than just simply, an older man looking after a lonely young woman. But I don't know. So we can't know for sure that what there was between them. It's not really spelled out in the film. And then Mary says, no, Lenslark says the eco-nihilists will be overjoyed to see Volkswagen close. Yeah, that's it. That's what the Greens are about. The Greens are about that. They're happy. Good. They're gone. That's why they're just an absolute bane of Germany to have these horrible creatures in government. That they're just happy to see. Germany's one unquestioned accomplishment since World War II. They're great manufacturing industry, and they want to see it destroyed. And Mary says, a film club continue. Maybe it's my TV, but I only see the introduction you give. Do I need to push a button? No, I think what it was that when I gave those are different. You see, I used to do a kind of introduction to movies, but there was no, I didn't show the movie. Now I kind of show the movie, and I don't do the introduction. So I might get back to doing the introduction, but so there used to be the introductions, but then there was no movie. Now we have a movie but no introduction. So if you let's say you have something like The Sweet Smell of Success, I did an introduction, but I didn't screen the movie. But Chinatown, I screened the movie, but I didn't do an introduction. So anyway, Dale Owen says, good to see you, Dale. Schultz says, AFD is damaging Germany's reputation. Yeah, I saw that. Can you believe that incredible comment? Yes, it's amazing. So they're damaging Germany's reputation. You think, now, who has done more to damage Germany's reputation? The AFD or Sergeant Schultz, who was humiliated and treated with utter contempt in the White House when Biden, ignoring him, declared, "We will make sure that Nord Stream is ended." And how will you do that, Mr. President? Don't worry, we will make sure it happens. So yeah, that's, I don't know any German chancellor ever who has been that humiliated. And so for him to say, "Oh, damaging our reputation," yeah, yeah. Yeah. Um, Mr. Wonderful says, even the popular pubs have shut down now that locals would visit to watch soccer games. Okay. Um, let's see. Um, and Dale says SPD, CDU, CSU, FPD, Greens, Linke, running a sort of cartel. Yeah, it is a kind of a cartel. But I think they can't form a government in Thuringia without the Sarah Wagenknecht's party. I think that is going to. But there's the Christian Democrats don't seem to want to form a government with the Linke, um, and so if they don't form a government with the Die Linke, and I don't, I'm not even sure whether they've got that even that gives them the numbers they want. Then they have to go with Sarah Wagenknecht, and that's quite problematic, as I was explaining earlier. So if she caves and she joins this government with the Christian Democrats, I think that's political suicide for her. So then she'll just be another opportunist. So, but you're right; it's a cartel. And Gail says about Starmer, he's similar to Starmer, boring, sanctimonious, narrow-minded, and arrogant. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, arrogant, lacking wholly in imagination, but also menacing. And Cynthia says, also, even if Catherine was Evelyn's sister, it's still very inappropriate for her to carry on an affair with her sister's husband. Um, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to say though that you could have it's a way of keeping it in the family. I mean, it's not my cup of tea exactly, but I can see that you might think that well, at least it's in the family. I mean, he could be he could be going off somewhere else and so on. So I mean, I can see why she may want to keep it in the family and not some not rather than he picks up some floozy somewhere else. But yeah, I don't know. But I think the question is still I think it was which we discussed earlier. Do we know for sure that they were having an affair? I think the film is still somewhat ambiguous about that. Um, So Ivan Groznev says, George, what do you think Trump's mystery plan for peace in Ukraine will most likely consist of? Well, I mean, that's a very good question because I mean, Viktor Orban, who talked to him, had assumed, the common sense position, which is, well, Trump will go to Ukraine and say, well, that's it, we're done. You have to start negotiating with Russia. Otherwise, we're not going to send you anything more. And then he'll go to Russia and say, well, you have to go and sit down and talk to and negotiate with Ukraine. Otherwise, if you don't, we'll send everything we've got in our armory to Ukraine. Now, the problem with that argument is that, of course, Ukraine can start making its calculations and say, well, the only thing we need to ensure is that these talks fail. If the talks fail, and it seems as if it's Russia's fault, and chances are Ukraine, Ukraine's much better at public relations than Russia is. That's just a fact. They're going to make it seem that the talks have failed because of Russia. So therefore, the Ukrainians will turn to Trump and say, okay, now you said you were going to give us everything you've got. So give us everything. Now, that's the way I think some of the people around Trump are thinking. Orban is thinking that they're just going to cut off Ukraine and that's it. They're just going to Trump is going to pull the plug on Ukraine. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't believe Trump is just going to pull the plug on Ukraine. So if, as I say, he says to he says to Ukraine, well, unless you start negotiating with Russia, we're going to cut off all aid. And then he turns around to Russia and says, well, unless you start negotiating with Ukraine, we're going to give you Ukraine everything it wants. Then I think Ukraine is going to manipulate the peace talks in such a way that it seems as if Russia was the one that sabotaged it. Much as they did that in Yugoslavia. That was the somehow the Serbs were the ones who were obdurate and refusing to negotiate. Completely ridiculous. Then I think Trump is just going to escalate in Ukraine, and then I don't think that the war comes to an end unless Russia will say, it's not worth getting into a fight with Trump. Trump is mercurial. Trump is erratic. And maybe it's in our interest really to call it a day and bring this war to an end. I don't know. I still have a feeling that Russia would like to end this war really quite soon. It hasn't worked out the way Russia had intended, and that happens in war. Things very rarely turn out the way you want them to. And so that's it. And then Putin will take some kind of a deal. And depending on what the line of contact will be at that time, the chances are Russia will have made some progress in Donetsk. And that may be why Russia is pushing forward now in Donetsk rather than attending to the Kursk issue, thinking that, well, Trump could be in power in a few months' time. We want to take as much of Donetsk as we can, so that we can say, okay, let's bring this thing to an end. We've got almost all of Lugansk. We will have a big chunk of Donetsk. And then Russia can say, well, we've achieved some of our objectives when we launched the so-called special military operation. I think that's where it's heading. The rest about, demilitarization, denazification of Ukraine, I don't think those are achievable. And you could say that given Trump's lack of enthusiasm for NATO, then at least Ukraine will not join NATO, at least not as long as Trump is there. After Trump's gone, I think Ukraine will join NATO. But I think that's kind of where it's headed. So I think that there'll be some sort of a deal cobbled together. Russia takes most of Donetsk and Lugansk, but Russia's not really able to prevent Ukraine's the rest of Ukraine, the non-Russian occupied part of Ukraine, which is about 75%. Will not be able to prevent that from being incorporated within all the Atlanticist institutions. Mr. Wonderful says Zionists responsible for the Nazis in the Balfour Declaration, and the Zionists took British weapons to wage a war, displacing of this. All right. And then Zlaka says the European right is anti-jihadist, so naturally form alliance with a pro-Israel lobby. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's where that it comes to. It's the anti-jihadism. What they don't seem to realize is that Israel is not their ally on that. if it comes to supporting jihadis, Israel is happy to support um, jihadism. Israel is not a fan of the nation state and a nationalism. I think it's again, you know, the way it works is that yeah, Israel, yeah, well, that's good. Israel's a nation state. That doesn't mean we recognize anyone else's um, nation states. I think they don't fully realize the very sly game that Israel plays. Israel plays to the vanity of the right, but that doesn't mean that Israel at all recognizes other nations' right to self-determination. And I'm not even talking about the Palestinians, but they don't recognize other people's right to self-determination. And then Cynthia says, no, Catherine and Hollis, her stepfather, were showing more just simple affection for each other. Hollis also sent Evelyn to Mexico so that they could give birth to her daughter there. So he undoubtedly knew Catherine was Evelyn's daughter. Is that true? I was under the impression, again, you may know more about this than I do, Cynthia. I was under the impression that that Hollis wasn't really a part of that. I mean, that she got pregnant. She had the child. I don't think I think she ran away to Mexico. And then Hollis came to pick her up in Mexico and bring her back. But that was more of as a kind of a favor to Noah Cross. And then subsequently she married Hollis. I don't know where the child was. I mean, you may be right, but I didn't get the impression when she was talking that in all that time she was bringing up the child, because if she was bringing up the child, then why would she make a special point of telling Jake, I really want to be with her now? That now I really want to be with her. It's like she has neglected her all these years. Now I want to be with her. So that's how I understood it. I mean, again, maybe you're right and I'm wrong, but I didn't think Hollis' role there was that he was sent by Noah Cross, and Hollis was a nice guy, and Hollis brought her back, but he didn't bring her back with the child. That's that. But again, you may be right about that. Lenslock says Trump will veto Congress bills funding Ukraine if he really means what he says. Well, and that's a big if. And that whether he'll do that or not. I mean, that we don't know, to be honest. Trump has been so vague in outlining his Ukraine position that yeah, he could well veto Ukraine funding bills or not. We just don't know which way he's going to go. And I mean, he is very mercurial, and he hasn't really thought this through. That's why Orban can get one idea of what Trump wants to do, and then Pompeo gets another idea. So Trump just tells people what they want to hear. So anyway, Cynthia says, I know it's not incest, but most women would deeply resent it. Okay, so we talked about that. All right. Okay. And then NKMLD says, I think there is the general gist that the AFD could bring cheap energy or more peaceful approach to geopolitics. At least that is a topic. Also for Wagenknecht energy is another topic. The general economic direction of the AFD, not sure. It's very liberal, if that's the right word. Not everyone likes it. No, I think all of that is true. I think the AFD is anti-war. The AFD wants to end German deindustrialization. The AFD wants cheap energy. I think those are the important things. And of course, they want an end to immigration, which are also undermining the German economy. So I think that's the those are the package. Now, there's an anti-American element that's implicit in that, because if you pursue those policies, you're going to come into confrontation with the United States. Um, but they're not as AFD is not as explicitly anti-American in the way Zera Wagenknecht is. I mean that because, as I say, she did come from the left, from the East German Communist Party. Um, but as I say, the problem for the AFD is that they go down that path, they're going to be banned. I mean, they're already being threatened with being banned. So if they come out explicitly in a very anti-American direction, I think that they're done. I think they'll be banned. They're a threat to German democracy. They're a threat to the German constitution. Boom, they're outlawed. Okay. He says, Essay de Lendam says, George has adequately dispensed with the attempt to identify him with O'Brien. Oh, thank God for that. Presented another, but he might still almost be Professor Moriarty. Do I like Professor Moriarty? Oh, that's not bad. I think I prefer Moriarty to O'Brien. O'Brien was a really creepy guy, but being a kind of a master criminal, that's not bad. Sherlock Holmes's chief protagonist. I like that. Anyway. Stefan says the point is to focus on relations of production rather than get bogged down in vague, obscuring conception of class we've seen since Marx. Yeah, I understand that, but the problem is, as always, that you have to. It has to be a lot more sophisticated than that, because you don't have anyone now owning the means of production. So therefore, when you talk about class, you're going to have to talk about there's very, very few people actually own the means of production. So when you and then if you have sort of shareholders, small shareholders, well, I own a few shares of Microsoft. I don't know that gets you to be a member of the bourgeoisie. I mean, all right, maybe if you have a few shares of Microsoft, that could be quite valuable. But I don't know. You have of some company, you own some shares, and I guess then you are an owner of the means of production. That doesn't really get you very far. If you own a small business, like a tool maker, you make a tool making business. I don't. Does that count as a member of the bourgeoisie? I mean, the point about this class is there has to be a much more complicated analysis. How the modern workforce and how people fit in, and and their understanding of class and status within the modern workforce. So I think just Marx had a very, very basic conception. And he had he formed his conception when he looked at mid-19th century capitalism, and he saw that where you had these big factory owners and you had the workers working in the factories, and then he said, well, therefore there are these two basic classes: the classes of the factory owners and the people, the proletariat, who didn't have anything but they were working in these factories. And then he figured out, well, eventually there are going to be fewer and fewer factory owners, because everything's going to be centralized and owned by the kind of a corporate central, and everyone will be a proletariat. And eventually, boom, we're going to take over from the bourgeoisie, because there aren't really that many of them. But I mean, that was roughly. I mean, but that's a more evolutionary theory. But Marx wasn't entirely evolutionary. He liked the idea of revolution, and therefore a kind of a violent overthrow of the rule of the capitalists. Yokobachi, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's see. And then Len's Lark says Moriarty was a pretty nasty guy. Yeah. Okay, but I still prefer him to O'Brien. I really didn't want to be O'Brien. I think he killed people. Yes, he was. He was a very, very nasty admiral. But and this last says, yeah, O'Brien was worse. Anyway, they come. I've addressed all of your comments. My time is way, way past due. So thank you very much, everyone who has joined me. Thank you for all of your questions, your comments. Calling you Professor Moriarty, that's good. I appreciate that. Anyway, thank you, everybody. I'm going to have to deal with the dogs tomorrow. You know how grueling that is. Wednesday with the hounds. But that's my lot in life. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again on Thursday. Again, come with comments, criticisms, suggestions, ideas, opinions. Everything is good. All right. See you Thursday. Good night. All the best. Bye-bye.